I spotted this grandfather clock on the curb while driving through the neighborhood on trash day. It had fallen over at some point and wasn't working, but I knew I could do something with it, so I loaded it up and brought it home to make it useful again. I immediately got to work gutting out the clock parts. I have absolutely zero experience with these clocks, but it clearly states on the back 3 times that it's made in China, and there are plenty of other signs that this isn't an expensive antique I'm about to destroy. I'm pretty sure these gold things are supposed to be heavy weights that cause the clock to function. However, these are lightweight plastic with hooks that are just screwed into the cabinet. And we've got the key and other various parts here. What do we got going on in here? Alright, we're gonna take this clock face off now. It's just someone out there is gonna yell at me for doing this, but from what I've researched, this clock is cheaply made and it's not worth trying to fix it. So it's just gonna fall down when I do this. Alright, there's the clock removed. There's the innards. I don't know anything about this stuff. Maybe someone else out there can tell me if I made a mistake here. I'll set this aside for now. I think I could probably put a shelf here and then a few shelves down here. But next, I'm gonna go ahead and take these doors off, get them out of the way. Alright, this is where we're at. Pretty much done taking everything apart. Now I think it's probably about time to get all this cleaned up. Maybe do a little scuff sand or something like that and get it ready for paint. First things first, let's wood fill these holes for the screws for where the clock face was mounted. These aren't really going to be seen whenever the doors are closed, but they will be seen when they're opened. We'll just go ahead and fill them up. Clean this, I'm going to use some TSP and some warm water. About that much in there. I'm going to dust off the majority of this dust first with a brush. Just make it a little bit easier when I'm wiping things down. I'm not having to push this dust around. Ooh, that's bad. Someone out there is probably asking why I don't have a vacuum to do all this instead of having all this dust flying around, and the answer is that the sound of a brush is much easier on the ears than this. Sometimes I prefer to use the vacuum when I'm cleaning things like spiders, egg sacs, and webs from underneath the furniture, but when recording videos, I try not to use the vacuum too much, especially connected to my sander, simply because of all the noise. I have to deal with more dust, but I wear a respirator to protect myself, and I can clean up all the dust later on before painting. The wood filler wasn't smooth enough after the first coat, so I applied a little more and let it dry while I continued prepping. That was 150 grit that I had on that sandpaper, and it ripped through this finish. I don't want to over sand that much, so probably gonna have to tone it down a little bit, use a finer grit. While that's drying, let's go ahead and get this thing cleaned up. I'm gonna clean off all the remaining dust and any grime or dirt or anything that might be at the base. That's just from wiping off the back and the top. Alright, now that everything's cleaned down, I'm gonna do a scuff sanding with the 3x4 sander. I've got 220 grit sandpaper with the soft sanding sponge so I could get around all these details without over sanding. Alright, we got this all sanded. That's a little scuff sanding, nothing too crazy. Just enough for the paint to stick to. So now I've got to get all this cleaned up. Then we'll do a final wipe down. And we can get this thing primed and ready for paint. Instead of taping off this glass, I'm just going to remove it. There's little rubber stoppers in here. I'm going to go ahead and primer it first with some Rust-Oleum spray paint. That'll seal in all of this red finish and kind of put a barrier in between that stain and the paint that we're going to be using. Alright, so this is what we got after the primer's been sprayed. I think I'm probably going to add another coat because this wood wasn't sealed compared to this. This was unfinished, so I want to make sure that this is sealed in. And any areas right here where the wood is exposed, I want to make sure that we get enough coverage so that this is fully sealed in and doesn't interfere with our paint later, just in case. It'll also give me an opportunity to fix some places that I missed, like right here. Got these doors all primed, got the body primed and everything ready to go. To start off painting this piece, I'm going to be using Kacha's paint. We're going to be using South Beach. It's this light green here. They also sent me several of her brushes. I'm going to use this 2-inch brush. Since this is more of like a chalk style paint and I know it's going to have a matte finish, it's going to dry a little bit faster. So I'm going to wet the brush a little bit first. Having a damp brush will allow you to get less brush strokes and have a better finish overall. I'm going to do the good old Kacha dip. For the inside, I'm going to use this antique white. It's called Khaleesi. Alright, this is what it looks like after first coat. The white is definitely going to need a few more coats. It's looking a little streaky right now. So far I like it. I don't know if I'm going to glaze it or put gold on it or anything just yet, but let's go ahead and keep going and see where it takes me. I was happy with Kacha's paint and it covered really well. I work in my garage with all the doors open, so the breeze with a factor in it drying just a bit too fast. I eventually learned that adding a bit of water to the paint or frequently spraying with a mister helps prevent premature drying. A few quick coats of paint on the doors and I was ready to move on to glazing over this finish. To create a brown glaze, I used this brown Valspar color sample called Deep Earth. One method of making your own glaze is mixing whatever color you want along with some Floetrol to extend the working time of the paint, allowing you to wipe it off before it dries. I think it's something like a 3-to-1 ratio to create the glaze. The instructions are on the back of the bottle, but I usually just eyeball it. Working in sections, I brushed the glaze onto the paint, starting with the top of the inside first and came back with a damp rag to wipe it off until I got the shade and texture I was happy with. Now, I'll be honest, I usually use oil-based wood stain over satin paint to do my glazing. I don't usually use chalk paint at all, and I rarely use water-based glaze anymore. I'm not new to any of this, I just haven't done it in years. All this considered, I'll admit this inside glazing was a bit sloppy. I spent a lot of time complaining how I didn't like it and wanted to start over, but the more I looked at it, the more I thought it looked good once I finished the outside. So I decided to just suck it up and roll with it. By the time I got the inside done, I had familiarized myself with the process and had an idea of what I was doing wrong. For the outside glazing, I thinned the paint a bit more with some water and kept a cup of water nearby so I could keep my brush bristles and my rag damp. The result on the outside was much better than my first attempt. Again, I finished up with the doors once I had the body complete. It's important at this point to check that these match the glazing on the body. If it's too dark, I'll have to wipe it a little bit more. But if it's too light, I'll have to apply a little bit more and wipe it again. I got these ones perfect though. To protect this finish, I used this Minwax Aerosol lacquer and a semi-gloss sheen. I use this a lot because it dries quickly, it provides a durable finish, and it has this nozzle that you can rotate to adjust the spray pattern from horizontal to vertical depending on where you're spraying. I'll spray about 4 or 5 light coats, giving them about 15 to 30 minutes to dry in between each coat, and then I'll come back with a heavier final coat. This tends to give me a nice smooth finish without really needing to do any sanding, especially on vertical surfaces. After all this work, the body of the cabinet was complete and I could move on to creating some shelves for the inside. I didn't have any wood that would fit and I didn't want to pay for it, but as luck would have it, I remember sometimes seeing some potentially reclaimable wood at this local fishing area that shady contractors use as an illegal dumping site. These painted planks appeared to be a cabinet that someone used in their garage or shed. Most were warped, but I was able to salvage a few and took them home with me. I got a negative test for lead in the paint, so I moved on to stripping by applying some Klean strip 15-minute stripper, allowing it to sit for about 10 minutes. Then after it bubbled all up, I scraped it off with a plastic scraper. As always, it came off super easy, revealing some nice Douglas fir underneath. It's not perfect, but it'll do for what we need. Then I repeated the same process on the other side and with the other planks. I know I should probably be wearing gloves, but do as I say, not as I do, right? Once the paint was stripped off, I used some mineral spirits and steel wool to remove any leftover paint and stripper gunk off my wood. This all gets wiped clean with a rag to remove the mineral spirits, and then I let it dry for most of the day. Sanding immediately after will just shred the wet wood, so just always make sure it's fully dry before sanding. Once dry, I sanded off the rest of any residue and imperfections with some 80 grit sandpaper using an orbital sander. Once I had the planks fully stripped, I came back with 100, 120, and 150 grit sandpaper to get everything smooth and ready for staining. I measured the inside of the cabinet, then cut out planks for the shelves. Because I was restricted to the measurement of the planks that I had available to me, I chose to use 2 planks per shelf instead of 1 big plank. This allowed me to use up most of the wood and be less wasteful. Once I had all of the planks cut, I chose the sides that looked the best and brushed some dark walnut oil-based wood stain to darken them up so it would complement the inside of the cabinet a little better than just raw wood. I left the stain on for about 20 minutes, then wiped it off with a rag, revealing some awesome wood tones. After leaving the stain to dry for a few hours, I brushed the bottom of the boards with a coat of water-based polyurethane to seal in the stain just so it wouldn't get on anyone's hands whenever they're moving them. After that dried, I coated the top side with several light coats to give them an awesome sheen. The biggest challenge for me with this project was figuring out how to mount these shelves inside with the cabinet's walls being pretty thin. I opted to drill out some shallow holes in some of this scrap wood that I'd measured and cut to act as support for the shelves. This hole allowed the screw to get deep enough into the wood that it would anchor but not go all the way through the other side. There might have been a better solution to this, but this is what I ended up doing since I was figuring it out as I went along. Let me know if you have any suggestions or what you would have done. Before mounting the shelves, I painted them to match the inside and glazed them with the same brown. This will probably rarely be seen, but I couldn't bring myself to put them in there standing out like a sore thumb. After measuring and pre-drilling some holes, I fashioned my homemade mounts to the walls of the shelf. This worked out much better than I thought and will allow the shelves to be removable if needed. Finally, I was able to place the shelves inside the cabinet, and I personally think they look great. I really like the contrast of this dark wood against the outside. Now that the meat of this project is complete, I just need to put the doors back on. I hit the hardware with a few light coats of gold spray paint so it would match the new finish better, remounted the doors, hinges, and latches. Of course, my drill died at the end of this project, so I whipped out my screwdriver and got everything put back together. Lastly, I remounted the glass in the doors and placed the rubber stoppers back to hold them in place. I prefer this method over taping so that the areas between the glass can also get painted. The downside is obviously the risk of breaking the glass, which hasn't happened to me yet. Hours and hours later, I was finally finished with this grandfather clock turned curio cabinet. It came a long way from being something on the verge of being crushed in the back of a trash truck to something useful in this day and age because, let's be honest, it's 2025. Grandfather clocks are slow sellers. Most people don't need a 6-foot tall piece of furniture in their home to tell the time, and this clock wasn't worth how much it would have cost to get it repaired by someone who actually knows how to fix these things. This cabinet is much more useful now as vertical storage, as evidenced by the customer who purchased it from me for $350 within 2 days of me posting it for sale. This one really wasn't worth the amount of time that I put into it for how much I sold it for, but I had to learn a lot of things along the way, and I know the next one I do will get done a lot faster. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a like, leave me a comment so I can reply back to you, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see y'all again soon.